Welcome to the GenC podcast by Civis, where we, the next gen citizens, get real about the invisible rules that shape our lives and the power we hold to change them. Good morning and good evening whenever you're hearing this episode. It's a welcome back for me and Antara on the GenC podcast because it's been a while since we've recorded an episode. I'm very excited because we're talking about something very relevant today, but we'll begin with how are we feeling today, Antara?
Hi, Sukirat, and thanks and welcome back to everybody to this episode. I'm feeling curious, actually, if I were to decode. There's so much going on about the topic that we want to discuss today. And we'd actually planned for this episode quite some time back. And now all of a sudden, it's just become so much more relevant. So I think we should dive straight in. I'm really curious about what is going on with India's labor codes. How are we thinking about it? Did it really consult people?
The central rules under the labor codes came out, and plugging in the amazing work that Civis is doing, it was really nice to work on efforts to reach the right people and get their lived experiences on the code. But like you said, it's even more relevant today as we see what's happening around us. But we'll come to that in the later part of the episode. But whenever we think about labor laws in India, it's a very specific image, at least in my mind. That is, we think of the factory and some industry and bells of some product and industry workers in uniforms. And we think of labor laws as something very rigid and tied to essentially the industrial economy. And to be fair, that was the reality, right, for a long period of time. The labor regulation in India has constantly seen some or the other kind of change. We'll not debate about whether or not it was into consideration the requirements of the people, but it has been in conversation for a long time. And if we look around today, there has been a fundamental change in the way people look at work. It's not just wages, but it's also the quality of time that they spend at their workplace and this welfare and the security that they expect from their workplace. People are working on an app, for example. Like that wasn't the case, say, even 15 years from today. And it's very interesting to see the kind of legislations also that have come out to acknowledge all of these changes. For example, the gig workers welfare legislation, or we'd worked on the Maharashtra night workers legislation, which was actually trying and acknowledging that women are feeling unsafe post certain timings and we should take certain steps, good or bad, again, debatable, but towards ensuring that women are feeling safer at workplace. It's been nice in the last 1 year itself to see. I mean, you would have seen a longer journey of the labor codes, but for me also, it was nice to track all of these changes that were happening.
No, absolutely. And I think you brought up a very important point. There was also the Karnataka domestic workers policy. There's now policies from Kerala specifically to the medical industry. So there are various places where the theme of labor is coming into play, and we're really looking at making it more equitable, but also creating a facilitative infrastructure for businesses, right? Because a lot of these codes have very heavy economic impact, especially the 4 labor codes that have come out recently on businesses as well. And they have to bear the brunt of perhaps enhanced gratuity, PF and other things too. What was really interesting to me in actually seeing these different themes that have been coming up is how much we've gone from a one structure type of labor market and contribution to a multi-structured labor market and contribution, right? And how much of that is actually driven by domestic need and growth also. So, for example, if you have, let's say, a consulting firm which is doing IT services consulting, right? There's a very fixed working rhythm to that work. But now when you think about gig workers, you're actually adding a lot of complexity. And this complexity goes beyond just people and workplaces also, right? It goes beyond businesses and industry. There was a really interesting legislation that came out in Maharashtra, not legislation, a set of guidelines on how to mitigate heat in our workplaces, especially for those who have outdoor work. So the government of Maharashtra has said that from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. there's not going to be any construction work. Hours are going to be shifted, that people need to have at least a covered shed and water. And when you actually read these guidelines and you start to hear people's reactions to it, you start to see how difficult the labor market actually is in India today. And heartbreaking to see that so many people who are delivering us our Swiggy and Zomato orders are actually struggling to get water because restaurants will ask them to buy 10 or 12 rupee water, right? So that's the level of at which care needs to be extended. And sometimes it's the government's onus, sometimes it's the company's onus, but sometimes it's just our GenC onus. So we'll come right back to that. But tell me a little bit, Sukirat, what were the other pieces around these themes that felt really interesting to you?
I'm reminded of this consultation which came out in 2021, right? The draft Rajasthan Code on Wages rules. Honestly, I did not track it when it came out, but when I joined Civis and I went through the blog that you had very beautifully written, we had done some amazing work with this org called Gramvani. We'll put the blog in the show notes for the listeners also to listen to. Certain voice notes which have been embedded in the blog, wherein citizens are actually talking about their lived experiences. And for the episode, we'd also actually gone through the responses from the recent course that came out in Feb, right? And plugging in the work that we did with Sarvam, we had this really nice bot that was made, which could be utilized to actually ask questions about the rules itself and get answers, and then obviously give your feedback. There was one common thread that I noticed, at least in both these drafts and the feedback. People are still fundamentally asking for very, very foundational things. Like, I would not even imagine that these are still things that people need to ask for, like timely payment of wages, right? Citizens who responded were of the opinion that what is the point of having all of these fancy rules if you're not even giving the bare minimum pagar that I'm supposed to get for my roti kapda makan? So it's just extremely saddening to even hear such things. And then obviously everything that's happening in Noida also is a very relevant case to the feedback that we're actually getting also on these consultations, right?
I think the other thing that was really interesting to me, just as you were talking about it, right, was that how much I would have thought in my context that an 8-hour workday is a good thing, right? But we actually had a lot of the individuals who commented on the Rajasthan Code on Wages saying that if you only give me wages for 8 hours, then I actually lose my earning capacity because nobody pays overtime. It's cheaper to get somebody else to come in and do another 8-hour shift than to actually pay overtime, which is what they're currently receiving as well, right? So there are so many complexities. And I think, again, after we planned this episode, there was something that happened really heartening where we had Srimati Vandana Gurnani actually attend the Civis Public Consultation Awards. The entire panel, her speech, and the wonderful sort of insight that we got will also be linked in the show notes. But what really struck me was that she had such a clear articulation of the fact that anything that happens in the labor domain needs to be a tripartite exercise, right? Between the government, between industry, and between individuals themselves who are experiencing these wage codes in the day to day. It was really shocking and really amazing to learn that the 4 labor codes, before they actually finally got published in February 2026, had undergone 139 consultations.
Insane.
Right? And all different levels, not just at the central level, but actually at the state level with different kinds and categories of the workforce. It was truly, truly commendable. And really, again, a moment to think about the fact that so much of policy making happens in the shadows. And just if we were to bring that up and to talk about it a little bit more and bring people together, we actually could have a much more robust understanding of the effort that goes in to make these laws for us as well. There were, of course, 4 labor codes that came out, and through the Sarvam partnership, Sukirat, that you were mentioning, we had about 1,157 responses that we got to the consultation. Almost 11,239 questions were asked, right? So that's a huge number in 11 different languages. And that really goes to show that most of our sort of efforts are in just decoding the law and how important and powerful that is as a tool. And to that effect, the work that you do day in and day out, Sukirat, also is to making sure that people understand and are able to actually respond to the law. I think if we can take it up the next notch and actually ensure that people understand the entire process of lawmaking, not just the law itself,
Right.
it really builds so much trust and really builds our ability to do some things in this tripartite fashion in the way that the labor codes have been put out.
Right. And what I'm getting out of this is that, of course, there's a lot of tension between all of these three parties that exist, right? But like we always try and leave our listeners with some sort of hope, is that all three parties are trying their best to get what they want. And we can only hope that the process is made more consultative and everybody's demands are heard. And again, like I keep saying, we can have disagreements, but we should not have disengagement. So considering there are so many forces that are pulling to arrive at something, there'll be demands that won't be heard, but at least there'll be a trust that I was heard. And I think for the labor laws, what we can always aim to have is a system where there's reduced compliance for industries, there's fairer work system for the citizens, and there's also an understanding that the government is trying its best to balance both these sides and also contribute equally to the welfare of both the parties.
Yeah, and I think I've already thought of my next GenC action, and maybe I have done this before. I can't quite recall. But in the summer heat, every delivery person is definitely going to be getting bottle refills for their water at my house. But I think there's many small actions that each of us can do in our day to day that really would help and make even a complex system like the labor codes easier and much more engaging to understand. And yeah, I think that's all from us today.
Yes, thank you so much. And we will see you super soon with something very, very exciting. Bye. Special thanks to our production partner Nakul Agarwal and Loyalty Studios. Their expertise transforms our conversations into a seamless listening experience.